Hi, I'm Haley Sweetland Edwards, and I'm joined today by Claire Babineaux-Fontenot, the CEO of Feeding America, the nation's largest hunger relief organization. In 2019, Feeding America's network of food banks and food pantries distributed more than 4 billion meals. And now, amid this extraordinary economic recession, those same food banks are reporting a surge in demand across the United States. We've all seen the videos showing miles and miles of cars lined up for food distribution centers. So Claire, we so appreciate you making the time to join us during what is obviously a very busy time for Feeding America.
Well, I'm so pleased that you would have me. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about the reality on the ground and how it's changed in the past few months for the food banks in your network?
Prior to the pandemic, our organization, as you mentioned, provided 4 billion meals, 4.2 billion meals to about 40 million people. According to the USDA at that time, there were about 37 million people who were food insecure, which just basically means people who do not have consistent, predictable access to a nutritious mix of food. Since then, around the United States, we've seen precipitous increases in demand. Some of our food banks have seen as much as 200% overall increase in demand. And at peak so far, it went up to an average of 70% increase. I don't know, as they say, one robin does not a spring make, but in our last pulse survey, we finally saw the demand come down at least a little bit, but it's still close to 60% increase in overall demand. We've served, just during the pandemic, 1 billion meals already, and we're on track this pace of need to, rather than 4.2 billion meals, we're looking at serving over 5 billion meals this year.
Time reporter Abby Vasulis wrote last week about the dearth in donations. Usually food banks receive boxes of shelf-stable items like peanut butter and pasta and things, and they're not receiving those now. How is Feeding America's partner organizations dealing with that?
We're having to really just rewrite the playbook. We have had some really deep partnerships over decades with some manufacturers. Some of them have committed lines of production just to provide food to people facing hunger, knowing it's for donation purposes alone. Now, we know that that's not sustainable, but in these desperate times, people have really, really been very innovative and creative. We have had additional partnerships, direct partnerships with manufacturers ourselves, where we've purchased food. Our estimates are that over the course of the first 6 months of this pandemic, that the impact on our network is going to be to the tune of about $1.5 billion of negative impact. Part of that is because we're having to purchase food rather than being able to rely upon donated food. And we've made some progress. We have had a remarkable outpouring of support. We have deepened long-term relationships. We have developed brand new ones. The country has rallied around their neighbors in ways that are so meaningful. I'm optimistic that we'll continue to make progress, but I think it would be naive for me to suggest that there aren't some tough days ahead for people. But any organization is going to stand and deliver. It's going to be the food banks and pantries, et cetera, that are part of the network that I'm so privileged to work with.
Absolutely. We've seen people out there, amidst a pandemic. What are some of the ways that these food banks and food pantries are adapting what they're doing, at the time, in a time of infectious disease?
Our normal distribution methodology has not been sustainable during this crisis. Ordinarily, the most efficient way to provide people with food is to gather a lot of people in a place where there's a lot of food, and then you just quickly distribute it out to people. We're not able to do that in this environment because that's not safe for the people who are receiving the food, who the last thing that they need is, on top of food insecurity, to have to deal with the safety issues of coming to get the food, but also for the people inside of our network, including volunteers who are out there trying to help them. So some of the things that we've done that are different is those lines that people have seen on television and in pictures. Those are usually at centralized distribution points, where a person who's in need of food drives up, and that food is provided in the trunk by people who are wearing masks, who are wearing gloves, who are practicing social distancing. That's a less efficient way to provide the food, but it certainly is the right way to do it, so that we can protect everyone involved. We have some of our food banks have been so creative. They've done mobile pantry sites in communities, but they've also gone down school bus routes in neighborhoods where the vast majority of the children qualify for free and reduced meals, and they've brought them to people's houses and then practice social distancing, dropped the food off, made certain the family was able to receive it and move next. So again, these are not efficient ways. It's not the way you build an efficient supply chain, but we're very, very focused on making certain that we're doing it in a safe way, and that we're getting to where the needs are.
Another thing that Abby Vasilis was reporting on is the lack of volunteers. I mean, you're describing these people sort of taking extraordinary measures and really acting as frontline heroes to get food to people, but there aren't enough volunteers from what I understand. How are your partner organizations getting around that?
Yeah, this is true. So I sometimes refer to this as a perfect storm, because we have increased demand, we have decreased supply, and we also have a decrease in volunteers. And there are a couple of good reasons why that's true. One of them is that inordinately, of the 2 million volunteers that we have around the United States in normal times, they are inordinately elderly. They're at high risk. It would be imprudent, inappropriate, and unsafe for them to continue to provide food. The other reason is that these centralized distribution points are, though they're not the most efficient way to deliver food, they're a more efficient way, at least, to do so. So some of the volunteers can't even travel to the point of distribution safely to be able to provide help. So what we've been doing is we've been very creative. Sometimes it's been through partnerships with the National Guard. They've been invaluable for us. They've come out and helped at these distribution sites. Sometimes it's partnership with another nonprofit like Team Rubicon, which is an organization that gets out during disaster relief and really gets out on the front lines during disaster and helps to distribute food. So their volunteers are very skilled at food distribution. They also, by the way, mostly are veterans. 70%, I believe, of their volunteers are veterans who are doing this as another way to serve their country, which is remarkable. So we have partnerships like that. The reality is that we still need help. One of the things I consistently encourage people to do is certainly, if to the extent that you're able to provide resources, please do. We value every dollar we receive. So you can go to feedingamerica.org and you can donate to the COVID-19 fund, and every single penny that goes into that fund goes right back into local communities. Feeding America's national office does not take any cost out of it, because we know at this moment in time, that's one of the ways that we can help, by making sure all of your dollars and cents go straight to local communities. So that's something. But the second thing that you can do on that website is you can actually find your local food bank. There's a food bank locator at on feedingamerica.org. You go in, you type in your zip code, and then that will tell you what's the food bank closest to you. And then you can directly contact that food bank and ask them, do you need food? Do you need volunteers? When are you going to have a distribution? And you can have that meaningful impact in that community that you either live in, or you might have gone to school there, or your parents might live there now. So one of the great things about our network is that we have such reach that whomever it is that you care about and wherever it is that they live, be it Puerto Rico or Dallas, Texas, our footprint includes that community.
So what we're seeing in the economic numbers is, more and more people are filing for unemployment every week. Do you foresee there being a downtick in demand, or are we just going up and up?
This is unprecedented for everyone. What I can tell you is what the data from the immediate previous recession showed. During that recession, we saw increases in food insecurity for 2 years after the actual event itself. And we didn't return to pre-recession rates of food insecurity until 10 years later. What's so sad is we had just gotten to those pre-recession rates in that 37 million. Of course, 37 million is 37 million too many. but that represented a precipitous decrease over a 10-year period. Time will tell, but our own internal data says that the numbers are going to continue to tick up at least for the next 2 years.
You said you wanted to start talking about where we were before the pandemic. This, the extraordinary food insecurity prior to this. What do we do as a country that is supposed to be the wealthiest in the world about this kind of food insecurity? What can we do?
The first thing is to be well educated, be well informed. I think we have a responsibility to know things like before the pandemic, 72 billion pounds of perfectly edible food were going to landfills, while 37 million people were food insecure. So be aware, understand. Hopefully when you go to feedingamerica.org, we'll provide you with some good information so you can become aware. A second thing that I would say is expect the people who represent you to be aware as well. Expect them to care about the things that you care about. Let them know, let your members of Congress know that feeding people who are food insecure is important to you. Be aware of what their record. My biggest concern is actually not what we're going to do in the immediate, because of the immediate impact of this pandemic. My concern is what's going to happen when the cameras are gone. It is likely that another 20 million people are going to be food insecure. It's likely that most of them are going to be kids and the elderly. And I just really hope that we remember them then.
That's a perfect way to end. And thank you giving advice to us and the whole TIME community about how we can help during this sort of extraordinary period of fragility in our food system. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I sincerely appreciate it.
Thank you for being here.